Welcome back, everyone, to one of the most unusual videos that I will ever do on this channel. Over on our new Discord server, which is currently available to our patrons and members, so it's kind of a private, exclusive thing. It's not that I want to exclude people from our Discord, but the whole reason we had to shut down Discord a couple of years back is because it got too big and too hard to manage for our small number of moderators that I could trust to do everything. And so a few of them came to me recently and asked if they could set something up on a limited basis that would be more manageable. And so we've made that a private thing to our members and patrons, but it's available to anybody who joins, even at the lowest level of membership or Patreon. But they requested there in our channel for video requests if I would do a reaction to this video that you're going to see here. And I'm like, wait a second. I know that video. That's the first reaction video I ever did, December 8th, 2020. They said, yeah, we want to see you react to your very first ever reaction video. So that's what we're going to do today. So December 8th, 2020, I did my very first reaction on Vlogging Through History. It was to the Alternate History Hub video, What If the South Won the American Civil War? So it's going to be an interesting experience. Here's what I'm basically planning to do here. Number one, I'm going to talk about what has changed since then in terms of the setup and how I do things and what I've learned. And then we're going to watch it, and I'm going to be really curious to see, number one, if there's things that I've learned since then that I feel like I would have changed or added to, or if my opinions have changed on any of this stuff. Regardless, it's going to be a fun experience, so I invite you to join me as we take a look at my very first reaction video that I ever did. Okay, so here we are. There I am in the corner. No green screen, as you can see. This is before I had a green screen. This is before I really knew a whole lot about lighting and how to do things and how to handle. I was using OBS, which is what I use today. I had previously to that just had a gaming channel, which was originally The History Guy. So by that point, I had been doing the gaming channel for 4 years, and so I already had a Blue Yeti microphone, which you can see right there. And up until just a couple of months ago, I was still using a microphone from Blue, which is the name of the company. I originally, for my gaming channel, had a Blue Snowball microphone, which is like this round ball that you'll see a lot of times. I'm actually using now this Hyper Quadcast something or other that I really like, and it seems to work really well. So I'm recording in my basement, and what you can't see in this video is just to my left, which would be our right as we're looking, you can see the little bit of the Union flag hanging there behind the microphone. On the other side of that flag is the furnace, and on the other side of the furnace is all the pipes that run down and go out to the sewer system from the house. And so if somebody on the second floor of the house took a shower, you'd hear the sound of rushing water, or flushed the toilet. If the furnace kicked on, it would make noise and I wouldn't be able to record. So I'd always have to turn off the furnace or turn off the air while I recorded, which meant that everybody in the house suddenly got cold or got hot depending on the time of year, because I couldn't record with the furnace running. You see in the background there, I've got a picture of the USS Wyoming, which my great-grandfather was a gunner's mate on. Some pictures of some of my ancestors there on my wall, and just the one bookshelf. So yeah, interesting. Hey guys, well, I've had a number of requests for me to do reaction videos to historical content on YouTube. So I thought I'd dive into that today, and I'm looking at Alternate History Hub's What If the South Won the American Civil War? So also interesting, of course, my hair's really long there, and I had sideburns at the time. My wife always wanted me to have sideburns. I always hated them, but I did that for her. The issue with my hair is I've got a lot of crazy things. I've got calyx in the front. I've got a big swirl and a calic in the back. And so my hair doesn't naturally lay down the way it should. So I always have to either have it short and spiked like it is right now, or I have to grow it so long that it's heavy enough to lay down. There's not really any in between with me with my hair that works.
We're going to watch, and I'll kind of offer some commentary as I go about this. And I want to say, first of all, that, when it gets into the topic of what ifs and alternate history, there's really no right or wrong. So any criticism or any differing opinion I might offer is just that. It's my opinion. It's how I see things. Alternate History Hub sees things their way. Other people see things another way. I would love to hear how you see things and how your reactions would be to what I say or to what is said on this video. Use the comment section below. And if you want to see more of this kind of thing, hit that like button and make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another video.
I also noticed there that that's before I had the underbite that I have now. I'm actually getting some dental work done this week, so you might start noticing a change with that.
We'll probably be doing more of this, so let's dive in.
Oh, my old intro! So I did have this old intro that I made for the channel with a couple of my earliest vlogs that I did. So this one here, that's Jane Rolfe Bowling, who's one of my ancestors. When I visited, it's not real far from Petersburg, Virginia, which is where she's born, somewhere in that area. And it was really hard to find because it's on private property, but it was right at the end of a dead-end street. So I parked there and was able to find the marker right there. Let's see what else is in this. All right, so this is Gettysburg. This is like my first long video that I did was like a 45-minute video detailing Longstreet's assault of July 2nd, 1863. So this is taken in that area. Back when I wore glasses. I have had LASIK surgery since then, so I don't wear glasses anymore. Crazy. I haven't had that intro for a long time.
The Civil War was the most devastating conflict in America's history. Roughly 640,000 Americans died.
And of course, at this time, because I didn't use the green screen, you can't even see the whole picture there. So a lot of my early videos are that way before I finally stopped doing that. And then for a while, when I did have a green screen, I still put myself over the screen. And then I paid someone to design me the overlay that we use today.
In the 4-year fighting between the Union and Confederates, which eventually resulted in a Southern defeat, keeping the United States, well, united. But what if in an alternate timeline, the South won the Civil War?
All right.
What, many ask, what would even be the outcome had the Confederates win? What would be the possible scenarios of a Southern victory? Well, dear viewer, stop interrupting me, it's quite rude.
Speaking of interrupting, I definitely paused way less then, didn't I? I mean, like I would have probably paused 3 times by now if it was today and I was doing this video.
That is what this video is about. By looking at facts and historical events, we can get a few rough ideas about what this Confederate independence might look like. What if the South won the Civil War? I'm not here to make an argument about whether the South could have won the war. The Union definitely had a significant advantage, with a higher population, more industry, and larger army. But in this alternate timeline...
How have I not stopped and said anything yet? This is crazy. I'm really... I don't know how I feel. Would you guys prefer it if I did this and like talked less and waited longer? Because I feel like I've gotten in a very strong habit of interrupting a lot more often.
Go right for the South.
So let's talk for a second before he gets into his factors into what would make a Southern victory. I see a lot of parallels between the American Civil War and the American Revolutionary War. Now, if you were to ask a Southerner, they would have said the same thing because many of them called it their second war of independence. And I think the factors that would have gone into a Confederate victory would have been pretty much the same. The American Army in the Patriot Army in the Revolutionary War was never going to defeat the British Army in head-to-head battle. It just wasn't the way they could do things, and George Washington understood that. The way that the revolution was won was 2 things. It was alliances, especially with France, but also with places like Spain, and then financial resources from the Netherlands, for example. And number 2, it was just outlasting the British until the public got sick of it, until they got tired of paying for it. I think the South, in order to have won, needed to do the same thing. They needed help from Europe, and they needed to outlast the Northern public to where they turned against the war. But that never actually happened. So just off the top of my head here, I mean, first of all, I liked that answer. I actually kind of liked this. I like that I waited and let more of the video play and then gave a longer response. Maybe I should get back to that. Let's see what he says here.
The future in this Confederate victory would depend on two factors: the peace negotiations with the Union and the size of the conflict.
Okay.
Being smaller and less developed, the South would only have a successful existence if the Union simply gave up on their war.
I agree with that.
There were people in the North who would have went into a treaty with the independent CSA.
Yes.
George McClellan, a Union general turned presidential candidate, even spoke of going to peace talks with the South.
Now, I will say this. The 1864 election, where McClellan was the Democratic nominee, McClellan ran as a war candidate, even though the Democratic platform was for peace, was for a negotiated settlement with the South. McClellan personally said he wanted to try and win the war. So I don't know if it's just quite as simple as to say that McClellan was open to peace negotiations. He may have been, but I don't know that that's really who he was, even though...
And it may be that what he was getting at there is, I find that I'm a little more introspective now than I used to be. I understand there's a lot more nuance to what people say, because I've realized how many times I've said things in videos that have been misinterpreted by viewers. I understand then that I sometimes misinterpret or misunderstand the meaning or intention behind a video creator and what they're saying. And it may be now that I read too much into him referring to McClellan. He was giving McClellan as an example of someone who earlier in the war was about negotiating. By the time McClellan's a candidate in 64, the Union is clearly winning the war. And it's a different scenario. So earlier in the conflict, it was more likely there could have been a negotiated peace.
That's what his party was for.
So it wouldn't be too crazy if this did happen. In this alternate timeline, it does, effectively letting the South win the war. If the South won early into the conflict, relations wouldn't be too damaged with their former Americans.
That makes sense.
Each nation would control themselves and trade with one another. Just as in our timeline, Northern textiles use Southern cotton to create products which make the South wealthy.
I could
This
see that.
economic relationship could easily continue if both were separate nations, at least for a little while. One thing we need to discuss in an independent CSA is just how long slavery would have actually
20 years.
lasted.
I give it 20 years.
Slavery was an
And I
essential...
think I still agree with that. I still agree with that statement that it's probably 20 years, and the international pressure and the changing landscape of the world's view towards things like slavery would be putting increasing pressure economically on the South to negotiate for the end of slavery.
essential part to Southern economics and social hierarchy. It was the main reason the South seceded from the Union in the first place. The Southern aristocrats feared the election of Lincoln would take away their main economic power. Of course they would secede to save their fortune. Slavery was even protected by the CSA Constitution because of this fact.
Now, I don't know what he's going to say here, but I would imagine he's going to say much the same thing I would say, which is that had the South become an independent nation, in order to begin establishing diplomatic relations with other nations in Europe, I think there would have been some kind of an expectation of a plan to eradicate itself from slavery.
Agreed.
Now, I say that, and I think most people say that, but the fact is the United States had slavery. So that wasn't a condition for diplomatic relations with the United States government, so why should it have been with the South? So maybe...
In this case, I think because the South is establishing itself as a new nation at a time when the world is very different. So setting up those first-time diplomatic relations, those first-time economic ties is different than the world in which this happened in the 1780s.
Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself in saying that, but I think at some point the South needed to have some kind of a plan to start to slowly get itself out of a slave-dependent economy.
Yeah.
However, with the rise of abolition in Europe and the North, perhaps boycotting of Southern cotton could have encouraged them to disband their practice.
That's possible.
Britain could have gotten their cotton from India and Egypt anyway, so they could afford to take a moral stance. Just as South Africa was slowly forced from the international community to disband apartheid, so
200 years later.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember when apartheid was a thing, and you can even watch movies like, I think Lethal Weapon 2 it is, and apartheid and the South African government's role with the international community is a big part of that movie. International community uses sanctions today, and sometimes they're effective and sometimes they're not. But this is the time in history when they're starting to realize there are other ways to deal with another country besides just going to war with them to change what they're doing.
150 years later.
Slave-based economy. Combined with increasing industrialization, less economic profit, and need to compete with Western nations, opinion could be forced to change slavery in the South. Slavery would have been disbanded only in the face of complete economic collapse, but eventually it had to be abolished.
Yeah.
Or I sure hope it would have. With this, possible abolition enrages Southern whites as they fear competition with blacks in the job market. We could see an alternate parallel of the KKK be born inside the South, but fighting against the anti-slavery Confederate government and free blacks. Even if the South disbanded slavery, that doesn't mean they allow equal rights to blacks.
No, I think that's a fair
black population
assumption.
In the CSA, almost 50% in some states.
Now, there weren't many states where that was the case, and we have to remember that the Confederacy, you can't put it all in one big block. Mississippi was very different than Tennessee or Virginia, for example. There's a reason why when Lincoln was first elected that it wasn't all of the states who seceded. It was the Deep South. It was the Cotton States, as they called them. It was Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida. States like Virginia, North Carolina, Arkansas, Tennessee, they only seceded after the war broke out. Fort Sumter was fired upon, and Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion. That was what pushed them over the line. They weren't willing to go all in on seceding just because of the issue of slavery, because slavery was actually much smaller in a lot of those states.
And I wouldn't say that they didn't defend slavery. Their thing was they didn't see Lincoln's election initially as the death of slavery the way the Deep South did. Because, let's face it, Lincoln ran on a platform of, I'm not running to abolish slavery. I don't think we have the power to do that. But he was running on not extending it to new territories, new states being admitted. He didn't want to admit any more slave states. And in the Deep South, where slavery was a super important, essential part of their economy, they recognized that that was the first step toward the death of slavery, as the balance of power would eventually shift in favor of free states. Whereas in states like Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, Arkansas, slavery was less an essential part of the economy. It existed, and it existed in a few other states as well. It existed in Kentucky and Missouri and Delaware and Maryland, who did not secede. So in and of itself, Lincoln's inauguration was not enough to cause them to leave the Union.
In a place like Mississippi, the black population was literally half the population of that state, and slavery was a huge, huge part of the economy.
States, an undemocratic government would be put in place to keep black citizens from gaining political power. Much like an apartheid government in South Africa, however, with a sizable white population, the government maintained support. Uprisings, protests, and rebellions could become commonplace against the Southern government. Politics inside the Union are drastically shifted as Lincoln and the Republican Party are remembered as the people who lost the South. Because Washington, D.C. is so close to the Confederates and it was built as a compromise between North and South, the capital of the U.S.
I could see that.
Moved, probably to a city such as New York or Philadelphia.
Now, I would think that's probably less likely compared to some of the other things he's talking about here, but yeah, I could see the possibility of that. But I don't know. I would say if I was putting together my own alternate history of what happened, I probably wouldn't say that Washington moves, but I certainly wouldn't put down the idea that that's possible. Now, I will agree with where I think he's going with this, which is, the post-Civil War period, that time from Lincoln's election in 1860 up until 1912, I guess it is, when Woodrow Wilson is elected.
Notice I said his name without any look of disgust on my face. These are the days before my hatred of Woodrow Wilson became so front and center on the channel. I hated him then too, but it's almost become kind of a meme at this point.
There's one Democrat elected president in that entire span
Grover Cleveland.
of 50 years, and that was Grover Cleveland. Other than that, it was all Republicans and almost all Ohio Republicans who were elected president.
First mention of Ohio on the channel.
The South wins the Civil War. I think that goes very, very differently. But then again, a lot of the Democrats are in the South. So,
yeah, but having said that, Lincoln was the first Republican president. It's a brand new party. A lot of other new parties had cropped up in the previous 50 years and then gone away. The Republicans could just be a flash in the pan at that point, and maybe a new party erupts.
It'd be interesting to see. I would imagine a new party arises at that point, but I don't know. Let's see where he goes with this.
Yeah.
And I will say this. I do feel more strongly in support of his idea of the capital moving in that scenario. I at that time, I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. But I think now I might more readily agree with that statement, that they'd probably move it to like Philadelphia.
Nationally, the United States and CSA would remain adversaries for the next few decades. Competition out west and in the Great Plains could even bring many skirmishes between militias and citizens. The CSA had ambitions to expand after the war, and even during
Mexico,
sought
the
smaller
Caribbean
destabilization efforts in Mexico.
I will say this, though, and I don't know if this is something I touch on. I think the expansion was more about keeping slavery alive by spreading it to new places.
Had the South won the Civil War and solved their internal struggles, they would have attempted to expand into Latin America.
I think most people agree on that.
Whether or not they could have accomplished this is up to you. Confederates did set up colonies in our timeline, though, including 20,000 Southerners who fled to Brazil. With the Industrial Revolution and rise of European colonies, the South would need to transform itself to compete with the rest of the Western world. It's hard to say if this could happen, since Southern life was based around agriculture. The South could have industrialized, but it must change most aspects of their lifestyle.
Now, there are other examples in history in the 19th century of nations beginning to industrialize who hadn't previously. I think of Russia. Who became the Soviet Union. They were a very rural, kind of agrarian society, even in the beginning part of the 1900s. So it could have been done, and I think the South probably would have recognized the need for that to happen.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what was going through my mind as this video was playing, so I'm glad to see that my mind has stayed the same on that.
If the Confederacy won, the United States would never have been the nation it is today. No surprise. The mindset of what makes us American would change as well. Before the war, people identified more with their state than nation.
Yep.
The
Ohio flag too.
changed
Nice.
all of
Go
that.
Buckeyes.
With a Union victory, America was united as one people.
It's said, and I know this has been referred to in movies like National Treasure, where they talk about, and this is absolutely true, the United States was always referred to plurally before the Civil War. The United States are. They always viewed the United States as a collection of states. It was only really viewed as a united nation. The United States is after the Civil War.
However, if the southern states broke away, this American unity is now difficult. Secession is a precedent which has proven to work. The effect of this would have larger consequences for the United States. This alternate U.S. is less of a country and more of a European Union.
He makes an interesting point, and that's not something I'd ever considered before. The fact that successful secession might possibly lead to more secession and more breakup after that. The idea that, okay, if I don't like it, I'm going to take my ball and go home.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. In a lot of video games that you play with alternate history scenarios where there's secession, there ends up being multiple groups that secede. That makes total sense. Once people see it can be done and done successfully, it emboldens them to try it themselves.
This was not the first time secession was talked about. New England talked about seceding in the very early stages of the American experiment. This is the first time it got to that point. So I hadn't thought of that. I think that's an excellent point. Not a lot of people bring that up.
both American countries wouldn't have the influence they did united in our timeline. Having to compete with a new neighbor brings international conflicts closer to home. Odds are American influence, both Confederate and Union, never spread as far.
Fair.
Europe would remain the dominant force into the 21st century.
Can't argue with that.
There are many different scenarios for how the CSA would be had it won the Civil War. This is just one alternate timeline.
I think, too, it makes it more likely that Britain or someone like Germany end up the dominant world power in the 20th century.
There's no way to 100% predict how the world would be had events been changed, but it's fun to analyze the possibilities. What do you think the world would be like had the South won the Civil War? Say in the comments. Like us on Facebook and subscribe if you have not done.
All right, so interesting. Very interesting points. I'll just add kind of my own thoughts. I would agree with 90% of what he said there. I think he makes some excellent points about what that looks like. There's some fantastic alternate histories out there, especially the ones by Harry Turtledove, where he explores what the world looks like in a post-Southern victory in a Civil War. And what politics would have looked like. I could certainly see someone like James Longstreet having become president like he did in Turtledove's books. It'd be interesting to see what Lincoln would have done if he hadn't been assassinated. Turtledove kind of has him go down the route of socialism, which I don't know that I agree with that. But it's interesting to think about. So I would love to hear your comments about that. Use the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts about what you think a Southern victory would have looked like and what it would have meant for the world and what would have been required for that to take place. And if you got requests for other videos you'd like me to take a look at and do reactions to, or other topics you'd like me to address, just let me know in the comment section below. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe.
The call to action. That was something I did a lot more often. I don't really do that whole YouTuber thing, asking for likes and subscribes very often. I guess maybe I should do that more often because I gained subscribers a lot faster back then than I do today. No, but seriously, it's nice to see some things haven't changed as far as my willingness to want to hear from the community and learn and share and do that sort of thing is still the case. But definitely see some things that are different as well. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Many of you probably haven't seen that video. It's my very first one, like I said, December 8th, 2020, almost 4 years ago. Next week, it'll be 4 years ago. A lot has changed since then. I probably had 100 subscribers at the time that I made that video, and those were people who had just come over to help get this channel started from my gaming channel. So, all right, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you think is better and not as good? And what should maybe I do differently now that I'm not doing? Let me know in the comment section. Thanks for watching.